welcome to video 10.2, Peer and Self-Assessment Online. As we explored at the beginning of the course around learning theories, many of the newer, more recent learning theories are focusing on the social construction and connected construction of knowledge. And so peer and self-assessment are really coming to the forefront as ways to assess whether or not that has happened. So going into this topic, I'd like you to consider whether you think peer and self-assessment are necessary in the online environment, and then what aspects of online learning theory or theories do peer and self-assessment support. So just to kind of orient us, what's the purpose of doing this, peer or self-assessment? And it's to assess a product or activity either done by one's peers or by oneself, and you would do it to improve your learning. So Fenwick and Parsons, the quote on the screen, also talk about being able to develop the critical thinking skills, being able to evaluate using a criteria, and being able to use the results of this to inform your action plan for further learning. Some of the benefits of peer assessment are your ability to observe your own actions in a critical and appreciative way. It helps increase your awareness or open your eyes to your personal biases and widen your perspective. It also develops your ability to judge based on standards and criteria as opposed to subjective, and it helps develop your ability to express your opinions in non-offensive ways. You gain confidence in presenting honest feedback to someone and to accept constructive feedback without viewing it as a personal attack. These are adapted from the Fenwick and Parsons book, The Art of Evaluation, which I've left on the bottom of your screen there. A really good one to add to your library. I know it seems quite dated now at 2000, but many of the things they were speaking of then were cutting edge, and so now we're just seeing them in fruition now. So how do you do it? Well, the intention of constructive feedback is to motivate the receiver to continue doing what worked and to help understand areas that they could improve. The whole purpose is to help further personal and peer learning. And so you really need to focus on the issues and challenges that you saw as opposed to the person themselves. Remember, this is about evidence-based decisions and a criteria and a standard that you're providing feedback against. And then I kind of like this little one, the EMP formula. Be empathetic. Pinpoint problems, be very specific, and move forward. Help suggest alternatives or ways that you think they might be able to improve. You can offer some comments and observation as your perception, and they can check it for clarity. It's not truth, but it's your perception of what you've seen. Be specific. Do not be general. It's not very helpful if you get general comments like, oh, great job, that was wonderful. Well, what parts of it were wonderful? How could I improve? What areas should I keep doing? And be sure you include those observations on what worked well and what might need improvement. Sometimes when we get into giving feedback, it's easy to just go on and on about all the things that could be improved, and the person on the other end begins to wonder if they did anything right. So being able to provide that balanced approach, some people call it the sandwich approach to giving feedback, where you start with areas that worked really well, and then in the middle you talk about areas that need some improvement, and then you wrap it up with some areas that worked well again. So receiving this feedback. Number one, remember the purpose of the peer feedback and the overall intent. So in the context of this course, it's positioned as to further your learning. And so there really is an onus then on the person providing the feedback to provide authentic, useful, realistic feedback, and the person receiving the feedback to do something with it. View it as an opportunity to learn, view it as an opportunity to improve. Number three, the third bullet rather, ask questions. If you're not clear on the comments, if they're given back to you, ask questions. And remember, you don't always have to agree with it. You have to filter it through your own sense making. And be sure to thank the provider, because giving feedback, giving authentic, meaningful feedback is hard work. And it is a learning journey. So it's a gift from those providing the feedback, and it's also a gift to be able to provide the feedback, because it teaches you a little bit more about yourself and helps build some of those benefits that we saw in the earlier slide. So what are some of the challenges with peer and self-assessment? Number one, how is that feedback delivered? How is it received? How is that whole dynamic managed? How is it set up? within the course online, what kind of supports are provided, and then what kind of debrief space is provided, or recourse or follow-up opportunities. Another one is peer and self-assessment changes the power dynamic, and so it's important to recognize that and introduce, in many cases, the concept of a critical friend. And you'll hear that a lot in academia. The concept of being able to provide constructive criticism to someone where they can take it and work with it and learn from it, and it's been provided from a critical friend perspective as opposed to someone judging or evaluating your work. Another challenge is lots of people, especially when it's used in a class setting, really don't want to be honest, because they're afraid, what if someone can identify them? If they're honest, will people be able to actually really take it? What if they're honest but it's not what everybody else thinks? So it's all kinds of comments around being honest, and really what that does is, if you're not honest with the peer and self-assessment, it derails the opportunity for getting any authentic feedback. Now you're just going through the motions and saying, oh yeah, everyone did a great job on everything, which is not helpful. Helpful perhaps for a mark, but not helpful for learning. And I think what you're hearing in this presentation is that the marks are one thing, but the learning is really what stays with you over time. Another challenge is over or under assessing the contributions against the rubric. So often what happens is self-assessments, generally people are very hard on themselves. And they underassess how well they did, or they're on the flip side and they just want to give themselves 100% and they're not realistic against the rubric. On the peer assessment, again, same kind of idea. Can either be over assessing contributions, oh, everyone on the team did great, we were fantastic, and not identifying areas of development or growth, or under assessing, where you're really critical, evaluating of everyone on the team in a way that perhaps is a bit harder than it needs to be. So strategies for this are definitely needing a discussion of the role and the purpose of the assessment strategy, the guidelines for giving and receiving feedback, and how we're going to use it in the context of a course. Another challenge with peer and self-assessment is the weighting of these in the overall course assignments. So, for example, if peer and self-assessment are allowed to have too much of a weight, then people could actually quote-unquote fail the course based on the other assignments in the course, but pass because their peer and self-assessment marks bring them over into a passing grade. And so there's some questions that need to be thought through when you're designing a course of whether or not that's acceptable, and does that allow learners to meet and evidence the skills and knowledge and abilities they need for the course. And then of course there's the personality issues, the subjectivity, and I can't reinforce enough here that when you're providing feedback for peers as critical friends, the focus is on the output, it's on measurable and specific items, it's not on the person themselves. So I've found 3 resources here I'd like you to explore. Some are short, some are a little bit longer. I think the titles alone are captivating, so I'll leave you to explore them. The second one, peer assessment to develop skills and capabilities, is one that I think is sort of the more general, just in general, not specific to the online environment, whereas the first and the third really start to focus in the online environment, what does peer assessment look like and what are some of the challenges and opportunities of it. So as you go reading and exploring and are working to synthesize all of this in your mind, I'd like you to think about whether the benefits of adding in peer and self-assessment are worth the potential drawbacks, why or why not, and how could you use the online environment to minimize the risks associated with peer and self-assessment. So I'll leave those ones with you, and I look forward to talking about it in our tutorial session. Thank you.